Hey guys, welcome back to the Tax Leverage Podcast. I'm Jasmine DiLucci, tax attorney, CPA, and enrolled agent. In today's episode, I'm excited to share how I'm helping Dalton recover $16,000 from the IRS through the power of what I call actually knowing how to respond to an IRS notice, because the IRS does not always make it easy. I'm going to walk you through my thought process to determine what steps need to be taken, what will be implemented, and the key insights that you need to know if you're considering disputing your own IRS issue. Okay, so whether you're dealing with your own tax issue or you're just curious, how can I get money back from the IRS? This episode's for you. Let's dive in. Dalton, do you want to go ahead and give me context on what happened?
In 2018, I filed my tax return through a CPA, gave them all the documents I had at the time. And in 2020, I got an IRS notice that basically said I had some unreported tax income and basically owed them further taxes on that tax income. It was due to a 1099-K from Google. And when I went to go talk to Google, it took me several months to figure out that the reason they hadn't sent it to me is because I had gotten a name change and therefore they didn't know where to send it. I eventually got that worked out with them, proved my identity, sent over the name change paperwork. They sent me the 1099-K. I'd gone over some reporting threshold for that year for Google Pay transactions, so they were just self-declaring me as, being in some kind of business or income. But the majority, actually more than the majority, like 80% or more, was my friends and family that were living with me, sending me the rent payment, the utilities payment, and that, pretty easy to get over the threshold with that. And that was actually not the first year I had done that. I had done that in a previous year or two and not had any issues. I just barely squeaked over the reporting threshold that year. I then went to go talk to the CPA that I was talking to at the time and who also had done the return for that year. They basically just told me I was SOL. I started looking at a couple of different options. At the time, I wasn't aware of my company's legal program that probably could have helped me. So I responded to the IRS, called them several times. It was kind of difficult to communicate to them because that's around the time they were basically completely disorganized due to COVID.
Okay, so to recap, I just want to make sure we're getting the full thing. So 2018 tax return, it still took a year or two for you to even find out about the issue, right?
Yeah, I found out in 2020.
2020, okay. That's when the IRS notifies you. The 1099-K that you received, you mentioned it was basically gifts, right? It was family money.
Yeah, it's mom, brother, and we did have one tenant briefly paying for the mortgage, but I don't think it was in that year actually. So it would have been just my two brothers and my mom, and also paying the rent. I was basically paying all the bills, and they're just paying me back their share.
Okay, so personal reimbursements, basically. No business.
Nope.
Nothing at all. Okay.
The only thing, and I called it out in my, whatever it's called, challenge evidence document, we went to some Cowboys games, and I was yeah, I guess I can't really call that as whatever, because it looks like they just paid me for tickets. And so I even said, okay, whatever, that can be in this unchallenged category thing. But looking at the sheet that I'd sent them and broken down, I even had the payments to the bank on the days that it went out, which it showed basically there wasn't any activity besides that, and would have been well below the reporting threshold for that year.
Got it. So that's still, you said Cowboys game. None of that sounds like you were a business.
I wasn't selling tickets yet.
Okay.
So pay me back, to be clear.
None of that was income. Okay. So fully personal reimbursements. And so I'm looking at the 1099-K just to give some context to everyone. It is for $29,102.10. So not unsubstantial, a very large number. So it looks like Google basically defaulted to thinking, well, maybe this is business activity. It hits our threshold, the $20,000 threshold. We're going to go ahead and report this. You didn't even get a copy of it when it was reported.
Yeah, and so I didn't include it on my return, which I think is the root of the issue, because I didn't have, at the time I did my tax return, hey, this is not, being used for any business purpose. It's all this. And so then I was kind of on the defensive front after that.
Okay. And since then, I know, leading up to this day for our podcast, I had you check your IRS transcripts, but I'm assuming you didn't know how to do that back then.
I think I did figure that out. And it was part of like the several months it took me to figure out what was the unreported income.
So once in 2020, then you figured it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I did figure it out in 2020.
Okay. But you hadn't checked it in advance of prepping your 2018 return or having someone prep your 2018 return?
I didn't, but I would have assumed they would have, but I guess they didn't. So
No, don't ever assume that.
yeah. That's the thing. I would have assumed, but yeah.
Most preparers don't. So just like as a general rule, even today where it's become so common, I like to talk about it a lot because it's literally like a saving grace. But, for preparers to do it, they have to have an 8821 on file or a POA on file. So then they're like, well, we don't really want to do that. It's extra work. So then they don't.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like basically what happened was once you sent the problem to your CPA and they just didn't help, right?
Yeah, they didn't help.
Okay. All right. So then at that point, you basically kind of said, well, let me see if I can just handle this myself.
Yeah, I was feeling pretty distrustful at that point. So because the notice form basically says, here's what you need to do, I also was thinking, okay, I'm just going to give this to somebody and they're just going to do the same thing. And,
Yeah.
I'll wait to see what happens. If it gets more complicated, maybe I'll get help. But I could never really get past the submitting documents and getting them to acknowledge they received them. I faxed it to them, did certified mail. I may have done something twice. And then finally, after like 4 months, they acknowledged that they received it.
So what's supposed to happen, and I know we're trying to figure out like what exactly did happen, but what's supposed to happen, because you got the notice and you are right, people that even know what they're doing are going to just follow instructions. So it's a tax court petition deadline, right? So once you submit that tax court petition, obviously you want to submit it correctly with your full protest. What's supposed to happen is you're supposed to stop by appeals first before going to tax court. Now, what ended up happening?
They received the documents and basically said like, oh, we'll get back to you. And then I kept calling almost like every 3 days or something. And then one of the, whatever their agents or whatever they called were like, oh, you're over some deadline now, sorry. And then just like refused to tell me anymore.
Do you think what they might have told you is the fact that you missed the tax court deadline?
That I don't know. That's too many years ago to remember.
Okay.
But, I would call them after work basically because I know it needs to move along. And I don't know exactly what like stage I was in because I'd sent in the, yes, I want to protest this. They sent me a follow-up letter, which maybe I can find it somewhere, that basically said, send us evidence.
Yeah.
And that's when I, started hunting and spelunking for stuff that was like not just 3 years prior, like 4 years prior. Finally managed to get all that stuff out of Google. They weren't very cooperative, despite, having no problem collecting that same information for the 1099. So then I gave them like a very detailed breakdown of like this Google Pay transaction, the income came from here and went to here. And that way they could see, whatever bank transaction, this is actually really from my mother's bank account. It went to here and it went to there and all the numbers line up.
Got it. So, part of the challenge is that we don't know exactly what happened in 2020. So that's the time when the IRS basically shut down. And then ever since then, they tried to claw back out of basically having been shut down. So I wouldn't be surprised if it just got lost in the shuffle. Some of my guesses are maybe they think you missed the tax court deadline, which it is a hard deadline. It's very much if you get it one day after that option for you goes out the door. Doesn't mean you have no options, but that option goes out the door. The alternative is maybe they did pick it up, and I don't know who you sent that evidence to, but I'm wondering if maybe that was more like your lower level IRS disagreement versus that actual formal tax court petition. That's almost what it sounds like. Yeah. In which case they don't have to resolve in your favor. Tax court would have to look at it if you were.
Something happened.
Yeah. So normally, if I was in 2020 right now with you, what we would have done is done a very formal tax court petition. You can make it less formal, but it's just objecting to everything, just making sure that there's no way that they're going to say there's not enough specificity or you didn't make clear your arguments, and making it very clear. Obviously, certified mail return receipt, keeping the support. So if they try to say you're outside the deadline, that's actually your golden ticket of you're wrong. I'm right. Statutorily, I've got the protection I need. And then at that point, obviously, it's one of those things. It's some people do resolve some of the stuff on their own, but the biggest challenge you have is not that you're not smart enough, right? It's just knowing what to expect. So I know when the IRS doesn't do something they're supposed to be doing, then I know how to call it out. So what I would have expected in this situation is it would have been docketed for tax court to some extent or held in queue for tax court. But we want to really resolve this at appeals. There's no reason to actually go to court. So an appeals officer would have picked it up. Appeals officers are actually pretty easy to work with. And so not that you always need representation. Something you said earlier, though, where you said, like with the Cowboys ticket thing, you're like, oh, I was even willing to like let that go. The IRS doesn't really view it that way. Like, if anything, we want to be clear, like we want simple is always the way I describe it. And even my recommendation, like at this point, for what I think you should do is going to be like, let's keep this as simple as possible, because the more like, you know what I mean? The more you say, oh, well, it's like part this, part that, like it's, I have to think. Like now, maybe he's just doesn't know what he's doing, right? So ideally your position, especially in something so clear cut as this, in my opinion, it's personal reimbursements. Not that I wouldn't attach a bunch of support, but I would do a very simple, clear, this is it. And like, they don't have to go to page 2 to resolve in my favor. They can go to page 2 and 3, and maybe we attach a bunch of support being like, here's proof. Here's an email from my mom saying she's going to reimburse me. Here's, the bank statement showing that it transferred in. You can attach all of that. But that first page being really the only thing they actually need.
I think I gave them like 4 or 5 pages, and most of it was like a giant spreadsheet. That it's like, you can verify this on your own if you want to talk to the banks. I'm not going to do it, but
No, and that makes sense. I guess it's just...
That sounds like still more than necessary.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you always want to put the IRS in a position where they don't have to do work. So a spreadsheet even is, it's not that we don't want to include it, but attaching it to something that allows them to not do work, like a clear, because a lot of times at appeals for something like this, I think you could pretty much go as simple as, hey, these are personal reimbursements, one statement, maybe showing how it adds up to your mortgage or whatever, maybe an affidavit. You can always attach like a 1-page under penalties of perjury from your family members saying, hey, this is what this is. We like to think numbers are more supportive, and they can be, but they can also be confusing if we're attaching a bunch of bank statements and stuff. The IRS will, they take seriously a lot of times a formal statement by third parties. And while it's a little bit biased with it being family, consistent statements from multiple family members, I think would have been somewhat compelling evidence. Appeals officers do like to get this stuff off their plate. So if you give them a reason to say, oh, okay, we're good. So that's the way I would have approached it. Obviously, with an appeals officer, you do work with them, like you speak with them, and then they'll say, oh, well, I need more information. So it kind of feels like you didn't even make it to that point. So I don't know at what point.
Yeah, I definitely didn't talk to an appeals officer. Me guessing just from like reflecting back on what things were like at that time, I'm pretty sure somebody was just overwhelmed and trying to get me to stop calling them. Yeah.
So that's how I would have handled it at that point in time. Now that we're at where we're at, basically the reason, I don't want to like guarantee we can do something, but I think we've got a shot, like it's worth taking, is because you did pay the tax, but you paid it in 2023, right?
Yes.
So you paid it in, it was like May 2023 is the confirmation you sent. So the biggest problem with this type of issue is usually running into it's called like the refund statute of limitations. And so we've got 3 years from the original timely filing, the later of 3 years from the original timely filing, or 2 years from payment. And we're outside that 3-year window. Had you made payment
immediately,
quicker, we would honestly not be able to do anything. We would just, that's it. Because we're in a 2-year payment window, I think it's possible for us to do something. I think the only concerning part to me is the fact that, so the way we, like the concept for the legal concept is like res judicata, right? So what it basically means is you can't protest the same thing twice. Yeah. And so we don't know what happened in 2020 when you protested. If you told me, hey, I just ignored the notice and we didn't do anything, then I'd say, okay, we're definitely good to protest. Because you did protest, but it almost seems like it wasn't a tax court petition. If it wasn't, then it wasn't like a formal protest.
Yeah, I didn't get any further like follow-up about like, oh, you have a date in tax court or something like that. So I don't know what happened.
So then if I was guessing, just based on even the thing you said earlier where you said they said I missed a deadline, I feel like they just think you missed the tax court deadline. That's probably what happened. In which case, then I think we're good to get the money back. So, which is good news. And just to kind of cover, how much did you go ahead and pay to cover this problem in 2023?
You probably have.
I have the answer. I was going to let you answer it.
Yeah.
It's 16,000. Let me see the exact number. It's like 6,000. Yeah.
Yeah, and the original amount was like about
$16,560. Okay. And a lot of that was penalties. So it was about 10,000 in tax and then about 6,000 in penalties and interest.
Yeah. It was like about a third of the reported income from the 1099K, and then basically because they didn't tell me for 2 years, it had already accrued like a massive amount of penalties.
Yeah, so actually even to cover that, because I think that's helpful for anyone watching, the way these IRS notices work, obviously it's automated, right? So nobody specifically audited you. They basically sent you a notice saying, we're increasing your tax. Here's the amount, which was the $10,292. But what happens is based on the percentage of that number compared to your actual return, they will, if it's high enough, if it's a high enough percentage, then they automatically assess a substantial tax understatement penalty. So if it's over $5,000, or I think it's like, I want to say 10% of your tax. So either one of those, they're going to assess the largest penalty possible, essentially. And then had you not qualified for that penalty, they would have just assessed a 20% negligence penalty. That being said, even in situations where a lot of people will get these notices and it's correct, right? They'll be like, oops, I did withdraw from my 401k. It's actually accurate. That doesn't mean you can't still protest it. You could still protest it, but you'd be protesting just the penalty, not the tax. But for your case, it's both. So basically the way I look at this, just kind of like explaining my thought process, obviously we know we've got a good tax position, but then procedurally, what do we actually do? There are different options. If you had told me you hadn't paid it, first off, we wouldn't be on a clock, which would be a little bit better. Yeah. It's okay. So I would say, okay, good. That's even better. And then typically I would go towards something like there's an offer you can submit, offer doubt as to liability. So you basically say like, I shouldn't have owed this and this is wrong. And we'd be doing it that way because we're outside the protest period for the notice. Since you've paid it, it's totally fine. But luckily we're within that 2-year statute. So we still stand a shot at getting it back, which is a really good shot if you didn't meet that tax court petition deadline.
If I didn't already get declined.
Yeah. And so basically it's going to be an amended return, which is probably you're like, I should have done that day one. But
I had actually thought about that at the time. And then when I talked to the IRS agent or something, it's where I'm like, I know something was like wrong on their side, is they kind of like implied like, no, I needed to do this thing. And which was the, protest and evidence. But I later talked to, I think, a friend who's like doing accounting or whatever. And they're like, no, you should have just sent in a thing. I'm like, oh, that's super helpful now. Thank you. Whatever. But I also then later realized that I had, at the time in 2020, very new to me, but in my job, I had like legal insurance and other stuff. But they also specifically for like tax and some other stuff had like recommended like people to work with. So when I went and looked into that, I felt really dumb because I was like, oh, a lot of people will at least like consult with you briefly, over the phone or something about your situation. And they probably would have been like, oh, I can take care of that for you, and I would have been like, all right, I'm struggling here. Yeah, please help. But
yeah, no, this is like the most common situation I see, which is actually why I talk so much about check your IRS transcripts. Like when you get a notice, like here's what to do, because, it's not easy. They don't make it easy. You would think that you could just like write a letter back and get a response, and it's just not that simple.
I also found it diabolical that they already have the income reported and make me try to match it. Yeah.
It is a little bit. You would think that why can't they just populate that on your return?
Yeah. Hey, you had this stuff reported. We're just going to include it in there. If you want to protest it, you can.
All problems that I'm working to fix. So yeah, I would say, so at this point, what it's going to be is the amended return. I've actually got it already prepped for you. Okay. I'm going to probably make a few final adjustments based on our conversation, but it's going to be the amended return. I noticed on your return, you had an HSA distribution and your preparer reported it as taxable, like as if you didn't spend it on qualified medical expenses.
I've pretty much only tried to use my HSA on health or like doctor or dental, so it's probably wrong.
It's probably wrong. I assumed, because it's not very much money either, so it's probably wrong. It's just I try to teach like certain examples, and I think that's an example of like you think you hire a CPA.
Yeah, they weren't checking anything.
And they're going to ask or they're going to do something. And yeah, they didn't ask. They just assumed it was taxable, probably just auto-populated, and then penalized you on it. So as far as what I'm going to be doing, so we've prepped the amended return. What it basically is we're out, so that refund statute I already covered, we're within the refund statute just for that $16,560. So even though I think there's other errors on your return, like the HSA, and actually I think the property tax was understated as well, we're only gonna, so going back to my theme of like, let's keep things simple, I could include all of that, but we know we're outside the refund statute to get anything else back.
It's probably just ignore it.
And so I'm gonna leave it off because I want whoever's desk this lands on, I want it to be like ultra clear.
Yeah, like
one change, IRS changed something, they messed it up, and the way we do it is I basically make that original number, it's like after the IRS adjustment. So to include that, make the change, and then we're gonna attach, it's gonna be like all the support. So all of the stuff that I would have wanted to attach back in 2020, had I been there to protest, it's going to be that essentially where it's a clear explanation, Exhibit A, Exhibit B. If they want the support, we'll attach all of the support. If they don't feel like doing any work that day, they could just look at page 1 and decide that we're good to go. And then you're also going to get, I have a community where you're going to get access to like office hours and stuff. So office hours, more information about how to check your transcripts, all of these things.
I know how to check the transcripts and stuff. I didn't know that those actually post. I realized once I was downloading them to send them or upload them to you that they're all December 31st of that year, which is like definitely before I would have done my taxes. So,
well, they're posted the following year, and then they don't even post that early. It's like June, I would say, is probably around the time. So June 2024, you can check for 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also learned that if you expect people to do they're like required to notify you of your like tax documents. A lot of the tech companies don't do that very well.
No. And that's the thing. That's why I talk to a lot of people, even clients. They'll be like, oh no, don't worry about the transcript thing. I definitely have all my documents, but it's not even under your control because people don't give you all the documents. You might have moved, they might have put it online and not notified you. They also, I've seen, with, for example, like 1099-Cs, I see a lot of times they're issued 8 years later.
In this particular one, I'm an engineer as my job. I was actually talking to the Google people and they're going like, I don't understand like why your stuff isn't like sending out. Like, some error they made in some database got like 2 emails linked together. So they just sent it to the wrong place. But then because it's not the right email, when you try to log in, it just says you have nothing here.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, all right. They emailed it to me. It wasn't like I could get it through their system or something. So it's wrong. And they never sent it to me. And even if I had like gotten a notification because of like a mistake on their part, like I wasn't even able to view it. So it's like I wouldn't have ever known that this existed without looking at the transcript.
Yeah. And I think that's the way I view it, obviously being tax attorney, but I think a lot of times we think in terms of fairness, we think, well, it should be sent to me. And so I shouldn't have to do that. But it's at the end of the day, if you're going to be the one holding the bag, like.
Yeah, as the bag holder, I learned this lesson too. People can just send you random stuff.
Yeah. People can just 1099 you. They can just not send it to you. And it's like, if you're going to be the one with the problem, you might as well be preventative for it, even if you shouldn't have to do that. Perfect. Well, so, I don't like to overpromise, but I think you should get your $16K back. Like, that is what I'm expecting from this. And so I'm going to give you all the tools. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to leave a comment so that I know you want me to do more of these, okay? That's actually how I know. And subscribe to the channel for actual tax law. And if you'd like to apply for my help for free, just like Dalton did, then click the link in the description to apply for a chance to be on the podcast.